Namaste and Punarapi Swagatam. So thus far you have been looking at the different cases of the third person nouns and pronouns in the first case, the second case and the eighth case. And very interestingly we find that there has been a rearrangement of the similarities of words. So the masculine akara ending was similar to the dual form of the ikara feminine ending, and you had a similarity between the akara feminine words and the neuter akara ending words. So it's an interesting realignment of similarities and differences, and what we'll try and do in the course of the next few cases also for the dual is to try and see what is similar and what is different, so that we can minimize on our memorizing of the different forms. So let's move on to today's lecture, which is lecture number 21, and this is the third person pronouns and nouns for the masculine, neuter and feminine in the dual, and this is part 3 of that series. So introduction to the content of this particular lesson will be an introduction to the third, fourth and fifth cases for the pullinga or the masculine words, and the napunsakalinga or the neuter words ending with the akara or the letter a, the strilinga or the feminine words ending with the a, the letter a, or the ikara, the letter e, in the dvivachanam forms, in the dual forms. And then we will do a revision of the vartamana kala or the present tense. And like you've seen there, and we've also talked about this earlier, the present tense has a technical term when we are talking of the hardware of this language as designed by Panini. In that hardware, the Vartamana Kala or the present tense is referred to as the lat. So there are 10 lakaras, meaning starting with the L, the L, the letter, the akshara L. So the lat is the one that signifies the present tense. Then we look at the Bhavishya Kala or the rit, which is the future tense, and then the ajna or the lot, which is the imperative forms. So we've already touched upon these, and today I'll take the opportunity to introduce you to the anadyatana bhutakala, or it is the lang, and this is the imperfect past forms. So we've been studying the past forms, but we've been doing a simplified equivalent of the past. What we're going to look at is the actual verbal conjugation or the verb conjugation of the past, one of the past tense of the imperfect past, also referred to as the anadyatana bhutakala or the lang. So besides that, building of your vocabulary is an emphasis, but I would also like to mention that we will be repeating certain exercises in different courses that we are doing in the different lessons, so that you can fall back on a grammar. I mean, you can fall back on the different words, so it strengthens this repetition will help to strengthen your vocabulary. And also, if you're focusing on just the new grammar, the new grammatical forms, it will facilitate your application of the same. So with these few words, let's do a quick revision of what we have seen thus far. So we've been looking at the third person pronouns and nouns in the dual. So for the masculine akara ending, masculine and neuter akara ending words, and the feminine words ending with a and e, and as we've seen, they've been in the first, second and the eighth cases. So this is a chart for that, and as you can see, I've tried to do a color scheme for you there. So we have for the kaha masculine, so kaha, eshaha and janakaha in the singular. What happens in the dual? It becomes kau, etau or tau and janakau. What happens to the feminine ikara ending? So we have ka, esha, and then we have sahodari. Ka, esha, sahodari or sa sahodari. And what happens in the dual case? It becomes ke, ete. What would we have expected? Sahodarye. But no, sahodari in the dual becomes sahodaryau. So there is a realignment of word similarities there. Of the akara masculine takes on similar forms like the ikara feminine words there. So janakau, sahodaryau. What happens to the words amba, the feminine ending with a? So we have ke, te or ete, and amba becomes ambe. So two mothers. Moving on, what happens to the neuter akara ending? We have ke, kim mitram, etat mitram or tat mitram, and let's do it in the dual case. So it becomes ke mitre, ete mitre. So what do we find now here? We find that the akara feminine and the neuter akara words have a similar form in the dual first, second and the eighth cases, because it's a repetition of the first case. Now let's see what happens in the second case. So like our study of the dual previously has indicated to us that the first case, the second case and the eighth case all have the same form. So that's a lot of simplification in terms of how much you need to memorize. So let me see if you can do this for me. So I'll give you a form and let me see if you can give me the dual form for the second case. So if you give me the dual form of the word balakau, so saha balakaha in the dual becomes tau balakau. Now I had told you that we'll do the second case, so that was the first case we did. Now let's do the second case. So tam balakam pashyami. In the dual, tau balakau pashyami. Uttamam. What happens to the feminine? So, tam sahodarim pashyami becomes te sahodaryau pashyami. Uttamam. What about the akara feminine? So, tam ambam pashyami becomes te ambe pashyami. I'll give you another word in the akara feminine. So if I see tam gaikam pashyami or vadami, tam gaikam vadami will become te gaike vadami. Uttamam. What about the neuter? So we had the napunsakalinga word tat mitram asti in the first case became te mitre staha. Let's do it in the neuter. Let's do it in the second case. So tat mitram pashyami becomes te mitre pashyami. Uttamam. And what happens to the eighth case? We have he janaka becomes he janakau. He sahodari becomes he sahodaryau, like you can see there. And finally we have he ambe becomes, the good news is it stays the same. So he ambe in the singular vocative is the same for the dual vocative. So it is he ambe, and for the word mitra it is he mitra becomes he mitre. Uttamam. Tari spashtam asti. Kinchit abhyasam kurvantu. Abhyasenaiva bhasha sarala bhavishyati. So I hope you are able to follow, and that you would need to practice a little bit, and with that practice the language will start seeming more familiar and easier. So let's move on to the practice of some revision of the verb conjugation. So we have in the Vartamana Kala or the present tense and the Bhavishya Kala or the future, and what did we see there? Yeah, we saw that the endings are the same. The difference between the Vartamana and the Bhavishya is sort of the Ishya, which at times becomes the Asya when you have an A, like you have Sthasyati over there. Otherwise it's Shya like Gamishya or Drakshyati. Alright, so that additional those few sounds in the middle indicate that it is the Bhavishya Kala. Let's do a quick recap. So, vadati, vadataha, vadanti, vadasi, vadathaha, vadatha, vadami, vadavaha and vadamaha. What happens to the future? Vadishyati, vadishyataha, vadishyanti, vadishyasi, vadishyathaha, vadishyatha, vadishyami, vadishyavaha, vadishyamaha. All right, so let me give you a practice for that. We also have on the side different verbs that we have been looking at, and they are from the first group. So even there are 10 groups of verbs. So we have 10 groups of verbs, and they can be conjugated in 10 different tenses and moods, which are known as the lakaras. And over and above that, we also have the possibility of a dual classification of the verbs. Some verbs are conjugated with the endings known as parasmaipadi that we have here with the ending of the ti. Other verbs are ending with the a, and that's the form of known as atmanepadi. And there are some verbs that take both forms known as, and they are known as ubhayapadi. Alright, so what are the verbs that we have here of the bhuadi or the first group? We have bhu becomes bhavati and bhavishyati. Pat becomes pathati and patishyati there. Gam becomes gachati and gamishyati. Uttamam. Stha, to stay, stand or stay. Stha becomes tishtati in the vartamana kala, but in the future it is sthasyati. And you see how the form, the root form comes back in the verb conjugation. Drish was another exception. So drish in the vartamana kala is pashyati. Yeah? So there is some kind of a grammatical arrangement in that transformation of sounds. In the future it is drakshyati. Uttamam. So let's just do the, I'll give you a sentence and let me see if you can make that for me. So I'd like you to say, we too will see. I just want you to make that to start with. So we too will see. Yeah, got it? So we too, the moment you say we too, you know that you are in the middle column here. So first person dual. So we too here in this column here, and vadishyavaha. So you find the word, replace the verb with drakshati. So it will become drakshavaha. Alright, now I'd like you to say there that we will see. So the okay, so I'd like you to say that the two of us will see the two trees, let's say something very simple. So the two of us will see the two trees. So what's the word for trees? It is vrikshaha. In the dual it will become vrikshau, and we will see drakshyavaha. So avam dvau or avam, those two trees, tau vrikshau drakshyavaha. And now the beauty is that because it is drakshyavaha, if you are using avam with it, you don't even need to say it, because the moment you have drakshyavaha, it is automatically understood. So let's move on to the next one, and here I'd like to introduce you to the anadyatana bhutakala or the lung, and this is the imperfect past. So there is a similarity there. We have already looked at the lot or the ajna form, and what did we see there? We had vadati became vadatu, and then vadatam, vadantu, vada, vadatam, the two of you, vadata, vadani, vadava, or so vadani, I will say, vadava, the two of us, and vadama. Okay, so the visargas have dropped, but you find another interesting pattern, and that is this one in the center L, which is tam, tam, ta. So if you can just remember, so tu becomes ti becomes tu, nti becomes ntu, easy. Vadami becomes vadani. So this is from the present to the lote. Vadavaha becomes vadava and vadamaha becomes vadama. So there is no visarga in this picture, and the easy thing is that in the middle you have tam, tam, ta. Okay, so tam, tam and ta, and vada is just the simple, almost the root form with the included there. Now let's see what happens to the bhutakala, and what do we see there? We have avadat. So the indicates that it is not present now, it's over. It indicates an absence of that at the present moment. So avadat, he has spoken. So what happened to the tu? It became the t. So the vowel has got chopped off. Avadat, two people. Avadatam, and tu became n. So avadan. So numbers, just have the n to indicate the numbers. Next, avadaha. So if you look at this particular one, that's the only place you have the visarga. So vada, remember there's an addition on both ends. So avadaha. Next, avadatam and avadata. Uttamam. Moving on, aham avadam. So you can sort of remember that with the, you can also remember it with the gacha or vadami, and the e drops off, you retain the consonant ma. So aham avadam, avam avadav, and vayam avadama. So uttamam. So I hope this is clear, and it's I hope that you've been able to recognize the similarity. The first being you have this tam, tam, ta. It's the identical L like the ajna, and then you basically see that the vowels at the end sort of drop out. Ti becoming or tu becoming t, tu becoming n. So the numbers for the aham, there's only one place where the visarga comes, and other than that there are no other visargas in this. Alright, so maybe we can just say that once together. Avadat saha. So let's do it with saha. Saha avadat, tau avadatam, te avadan, tvam avadaha, yuvam avadatam, yuyam avadata, aham avadam, avam avadava, and vayam avadama. Uttamam. So I'd like you next to also observe this, the chart that we have there of the bhuadi gana verbs that we've looked at earlier. So we have bhu becomes bhavatu, and in the past tense abhavat, pat, patatu, apathat. Uttamam. Gam, gachatu, and agachat. Stha, tishtatu, and atishtat. So now we see that in the future it had taken the root form again with the sthasyati, but here we get back to the present tense, the formation of the word in the present tense. We have tishtati or tishtatu becomes atishtat, and drish became pashyati, and guess? Yes, apashyat. Alright, so let's take one verb from here. Let's take tishtati or the verb stha and see if we can put it into the table here. So I'd like you to do it for me. Atishtat, atishtatam, atishtan, atishtaha, atishtatam, atishtata, atishtam, atishtava, atishtama. Uttamam. So I'd like you to try and make a sentence saying that you all stood on the road. Let's say you all stood on the road. So you all is plural. Yam stood, atishtata, kutra, in the road or on the road. So on the road would be marga, marge. So yam marge atishtata. Uttamam. Let's move on. The word bhu is very important. It's the word, it's one of those foundational verbs. So the verb bhu becomes abhavat, abhavatam, abhavan, abhavaha, abhavatam, abhavata, abhavam, abhavava, abhavama. Uttamam. So can you say that we became, we plural, became Sanskrit students. Let's see if you can say that. We became Sanskrit students. Uttamam. So, vayam, we became. So, vayam abhavam. What? Sanskrita chhatraha. Uttamam. Vayam Sanskrita chhatraha abhavam. What if you want to say we became lovers of Sanskrit? Vayam Sanskrita priyaha abhavam. Uttamam. So I'd like you to pause on these slides, so the previous one and this one, and just see if you can sort of make at least 5 sentences from your daily life and see if you can identify which is the corresponding verb going with it. So verb formation here. So let's move on and do some practice with the vibhakti forms that we have to look at. So we have the 3 katham for the 3rd case, kimartham for the 4th, and kutaha for the 5th. And what do we find? That whatever the form, so kena was the vibhakti equivalent for the masculine and the neuter words ending with a, and for the feminine it was kaya. So in this one we are focusing on the katham for the 3rd case, and what happens to all of it? The form in the dual is kabhyam. So let's see what happens. So saha etena gayakena brahmati. Brahmati means to roam. Okay, to roam around. Saha etena gayakena brahmati will become in the dual saha etabhyam gayakabhyam brahmati, because saha, the subject is saha, so the verb will still be brahmati. So you have to be very conscious about that. Next, he roams with many singers. So saha etai gayakai brahmati. You can do the same thing with brahmishyati in the future. So saha, we'll do it in the dual case. Saha etabhyam or tabhyam gayakabhyam brahmishyati. Uttamam. I've kept the ... because then you can change the different subjects who are engaged in these different actions with the 3rd case in the middle. Alright. So really you have a lot of scope for practice on this particular table, from this particular table. Just for our own practice, I'd like you to say, you two go with you two. So go, the verb is go. So gachati here. So you two go with those 2 horses. So it will be you two, or when I'm saying you two, I'm talking about the respect form for the masculine. So it will become bhavantau. Those 2 will be tabhyam, ashwabhyam, gacha. So because it's bhavantau, it will become gacha taha. Astu. Because the bhavantau is like the tau or the 3rd person. Let's go on to the next one, which is the neuter word, and what do we see? It does the same thing. So saha etena mitrena gachati, saha etabhyam mitrabhyam gachati, saha etai mitrai gachati. What will happen with yanam if we want to say gamishyati? We'll stick to the saha. So we'll say saha tena yanena gamishyati, saha tabhyam yanabhyam gamishyati, and saha taih yanai gachati or gamishyati. Uttamam. Now let's move on to the next one, and let's see here if we can use the madhyama purusha or the 2nd person. So we have etaya ambaya, and then we have the verb yati, which means to go. So tvam etaya ambaya ya. Uttamam. So it will be yasi if you are doing it with tvam. Now I've left the ... so that you can use any of the other pronouns along with this. So tvam etaya ambaya yasi yuvam. No, tvam etabhyam ambabhyam yasi. So we'll keep this singular, but we'll change here. Tvam etabhihi ambabhihi yasi. Uttamam. Moving on, if you do it with the aham for, if you take the yuvam for nauka, it will become yuvam taya or etaya naukaya yasya So yuvam yasya thaha. Yuvam etabhyam naukabhyam yasya thaha. Yuvam etabhihi naukabhihi yasya thaha. And finally, let's do some practice with the word nartaki. What happens to nartaki? And let's do it with the first person. Aham etaya nartakya yasyami. Aham etabhyam nartakibhyam yasyami. And aham etabhihi nartakibhihi yasyami. Uttamam. And then what happens to the last one, which is the nadi? So I'd like you to try and do this for me, and I'm going to give you all three options, and I'd like you to make the sentences. So I'd like you to say, we all go with this river, and we'll use the verb yasyati. So what will it be? So we all will be vayam, go with this river. So vayam yasyamaha. This river etaya nadya yasyamaha. Let's say that together. Vayam etaya nadya yasyamaha. And then in the dual case for the river, vayam etabhyam nadibhyam yasyamaha. And for the plural, vayam etabhihi nadibhihi yasyamaha. Uttamam. So like you can see, it needs a little bit of calculation in the head. So let's move on to the next one here, which is the fourth case, where the question is kimartham. And as we've seen that be it kimartham, katham, kimartham or kutaha, the form remains the same as kabhyam. So kasmai also for the masculine and neuter also becomes kabhyam, and kasyai of the feminine also becomes kabhyam. So let's look at an application of that. So we have saha tasmai janakaya dadatu. So I'm using the imperative here for the verb da, to give, but we'll use it in the imperative or the lot or the ajna. So saha tasmai janakaya dadatu means let him give to that father. So what happens in the dual? Tabhyam janakabhyam dadatu. Plural, tebhyah janakebhyah dadatu. Uttama. Moving on to the next one, ashrama. So tasmai ashramaya dadatu. Dual, tabhyam ashramabhyam dadatu. Plural, tebhyah ashramebhyah dadatu. Uttamam. What happens to the neuter? We know it's the same forms there. So let's do it with etasmai. So to this friend, give to this friend would be etasmai mitraya dadatu. Two of them, etabhyam mitrabhyam dadatu. Many of them, etebhyah mitrebhyah dadatu. Uttamam. Rashtra, we'll do it with etasmai. So etasmai rashtraya dadatu. So for example, the motto or the motto of IIT Kharagpur is dedicated to the service of the nation. So etasmai rashtraya sevam dadatu. So give your life for the service of this nation. So give to the service of this nation. Next, to these two nations, etabhyam rashtrabhyam dadatu, and in the plural, etebhyah rashtrebhyah dadatu. Uttamam. Let's move on to the feminine and see what happens. So we have tasyai. So we'll just stick to the saha for now, and then we'll look at the verbs separately. So tasyai ambayai dadatu. In the dual, tabhyam ambabhyam. So amba remains amba bhyam dadatu. Plural, tabhyah ambabhyah dadatu. Uttamam. Yogashala. Now try it by yourself. Tasyai yogashalayai dadatu. To tabhyam yogashalabhyam dadatu. Plural, tabhyah, not tebhyah, tabhyah yogashalabhyah dadatu. Uttamam. And let's move on to the word bhavati, the ikara ending word. So tasyai bhavatyai. Now that is a little funny. So to that you. Okay, so tasyai bhavatyai. It's a bit not very easy to say, but let's do it just with the bhavati. So to the two of you. Forget the tasyai here. Just let's say to the two of you ladies in the formal. So bhavatyai dadatu, for two of you. Bhavatibhyam dadatu, for many. Bhavatibhyah dadatu. Uttamam. And coming to the last one, which is yuvati. So here we can add the tasyai, or let's say etasyai. Then etasyai yuvatyai dadatu. Dual. Etabhyam yuvatibhyam dadatu. And plural. Etabhyah yuvatibhyah dadatu. Now just again pointing your attention to the fact that because the mind is an instrument of habit, when it hears sounds that are similar, as in there are like rhyming sounds. So for example, tabhyah ambabhyah or tabhyam ambabhyam dadatu, and then tabhyah ambabhyah dadatu, and then you come to the strilinga ikara ending word, and it becomes tabhyam yuvatibhyam. So there the mind has to stay alert and not just get into a mechanical format, because then you'll make a mistake. But then the next one is tabhyah yuvatibhyah again. Alright, so you have to stay alert and get the correct forms when you are using Sanskrit words. So we've looked at that. Now what I'd like us to do is to look at the verb chart of the dhatu. So it is dadatu or dattat. So dadatu or dattat. Tau becomes dattam. So saha dadatu or dattat. Tau dattam. Bahuvachanam te dadatu. Uttamam. Tvam dehi. So you often hear this kind of phrase, which is bhiksham dehi, very often in many kinds of movies associated with a little bit of the spiritual, the Buddhist, that kind of scenario. They show the person asking for alms saying bhiksham dehi. So dehi is the same word here, which is tvam dehi. So it's the informal second person dehi, and dattat. In the dual for the second person it becomes dattam. So yuvam dattam. Uttamam. Yuyam datta. So tam tam ta there. So then we move on to the next one, which is aham dadani. So aham dadani kim. So aham itopi dadani kim. Can I give some more? Next avam dadava and vayam dadam. So sometimes there is this possible confusion of it becoming dadva and dadma, but you have to just know that for the lot here it is dadava and dadama. So like and now I'd like you to try and make a sentence. So if you'd like to say that we all give, we or not we all give, so it's an order. So we, or let's, as in we plural, let's give to the two yogashalas. So us, let us give to the two yogashalas. One I have to add there. Let us to give to those two yogashalas. Alright, so what is it? Let us, so us plural is vayam, and the verb would be dadama, kabhyam, to those two yogashalas. So yogashala becomes yogashala bhyam, those two tabhyam. So vayam tabhyam yogashala bhyam dadam. Uttamam. So let's look at what happens to the next case, or the ablative, where in the masculine and neuter it is kasmat, in the feminine it is kasyaha, and together it becomes in the dual kabhyam. So what we'll do is that the table is there in front of you, but I'm going to stick mainly to the noun forms here. So we have koshat. So kosha, like vitta kosha, means a store of money, which is the bank. So kosha means a store, but it could also mean a pocket. So koshat, anayami or anitavan. So we're trying to do the past tenses here of the verbs nayati, anayati and nayati. So anayati to bring and nayati to take. So koshat anitavan, from two pockets, koshabhyam. So kosha, koshabhyam anitavan, plural koshebhyah anitavan. Next, granthalayah, granthalayat anitavan, granthalayabhyam anitavan, granthalayebhyah anitavan. Neuter, mitram becomes mitrat anitavan, two of them, mitrabhyam anitavan, plural mitrebhyah anitavan. Mandira, mandirat anitavan, two of them, mandirabhyam anitavan, plural mandirebhyah anitavan. Uttamam. Let's see what happens to the feminine here. So we have the word nartaki, meaning dancer. So nartakyaha anitavan, two, or nitavan. Let's take nitavan or nitavati. Nartakyaha nitavati, nartaki bhyam nitavati, nartaki bhyah nitavati. Nadi, nadyah nitavati, nadibhyam nitavati, nadibhyah nitavati. Nauka, so a ending becomes nauka, naukayaha nitavati, from two boats, naukabhyam nitavati, from many of them, naukabhyah nitavati. Uttamam. And the last one, amba, ambayaha nitavati, two of them, ambabhyam nitavati and plural ambabhyah nitavati. Now I'd just also like to take the time, it takes just a few minutes to introduce you to the column of the verbs. And what do we see here? We have anitavan or anitavati. And what did we see there? That it goes with all the singular forms of the pronouns. So saha anitavan, bhavan anitavan, tvam anitavan, aham anitavan or anitavati. In the dual it becomes anitavantau or anitavatyau. And then for the plural, anitavantaha or anitavatyah. Uttamam. But we've just learned the anadyatana bhuta or the lung. And what did we see there? It becomes anayat. Now I just point out something for you there, because it is, the root is ni. So it becomes nayati or nayat. A is the verb. So here we have an a plus a here, and so it will remain as anayat. So it's anayat means he brought it. So the a is a bit long. So he brought it, anayat, and then it takes on all the other forms. Anayat, in the dual anayatam, anayan, etc., etc., etc. Now let's look at what happens to take. The verb is nitavan, becomes nitavati in the feminine. In the dual it is nitavantau or nitavatyau. In the plural it is nitavantaha or nitavatyah. And in the past tense, in the anadyatana bhuta, it becomes anayat. So you just have to be very conscious, because the verb is nayati. So here you just have to add the the sound a in front and ta there. Anayat, anayatam. So you have to be very careful. Here you have the a and here you have the a. Okay, so anayat means brought and anayat means took it. So you need to just pay attention on that. So just to close one for you, to leave you with one. So I'd like you to say that you two brought flowers from these temples. You two brought flowers from these two temples. So you two is yuvam, brought anita. So let's do it with the actual verb form. So anayatam, uttamam. So anayatam or anitavantau or anitavatyau, either of them. Okay, so this is an equivalent there. Anayatam is yuvam. So yuvam anayatam. Kim anayatam? Pushpani. From where? From these two temples. These two would be etabhyam and mandirabhyam. So yuvam etabhyam mandirabhyam pushpani anayatam or anitavantau or anitavatyau. Uttamam. So having said that, we come to the close of this particular area of these particular cases of the third, fourth, fifth, and the really good news is that they all have the same form. So kabhyam, all three, for the three questions it becomes kabhyam. For all the three answers it is tabhyam or etabhyam, and for the nouns it is janaka becomes janakabhyam, mitra becomes mitrabhyam, amba becomes ambabhyam, and sahodari becomes sahodari bhyam. So for the feminine we see that there is just a bhyam that gets added, whereas for the masculine akara ending it is an abhyam that comes in, masculine and the neuter. So having said this, let's do a quick recap of what we have looked at thus far, and we see that for the dual you have the masculine and the masculine words have janakau, and the neuter is, so kau for the masculine, but for the neuter it is ke, etau, ete or taute, and janakau but mitre. But for the rest of them, as you can see, the masculine and the neuter take the same forms in the singular, but there is this small change in the dual case. And what happens in the third, fourth, fifth? So the good news is it's all the same. So kabhyam, tabhyam, janakabhyam, mitrabhyam, uttamam. And for the vocative we see that it acts like the first case. So he janakau and he mitre. Let's move on to the feminine words and see what happens there. We have ka. Feminine words ending with a or e take the same form. So we have ke, ete. For the word amba it becomes ambe, but for sahodari it becomes sahodariyau. That's why I've given it a different color code that actually matches with the masculine forms here. Okay, so kabhyam, etabhyam or tabhyam, ambabhyam and sahodari bhyam. So in the feminine it's only the bhyam that gets added, and for the masculine and the neuter it's abhyam. And here we have finally he ambe, which is identical to the singular as well, and you have he sahodaryau. Uttamam. So let's go on to an application of this. We have a Devata Vandanam where there is a salutation. So the first one is Shri Mata Pitribhyam Namaha. So you recognize the bhyam there. Mata Pita, the couple of them is Mata Pitra and Pitribhyam. Mata Pitribhyam Namaha, salutation to parents. Shri Lakshmi Narayana Bhyam. Lakshmi Narayana is the couple of Lakshmi and Narayana, the two of them together. Lakshmi Narayana Bhyam Namaha, salutations to Lakshmi and Narayana. And finally Shri Uma Maheshwara Bhyam Namaha. So we have Uma Maheshwara, add the dual case there, Uma Maheshwara Bhyam Namaha, and with the Namaha we've seen that it takes on the dative. So that's the fourth case. So you have to remember that Namaha always is associated with the fourth case there. Astu. So let's move on. Maybe you'd like to just try saying that once. So Shri Mata Pitribhyam Namaha, Shri Lakshmi Narayanabhyam Namaha, Shri Uma Maheshwarabhyam Namaha. I'd like to leave you with this thought of the impact of Indian culture, and we have an Academy Award winner, British film director, producer and screenwriter called Roland Joffe, who's been the director for the film The Killing Fields, etc. So he says of the Indian culture, he says that the Indian culture clearly gives the Indian mind, including the mind of the Indian scientist, the ability to think out of the box. So when we think about what is the relationship between language and how it is formatting the mind, we start getting some idea of where that genius is coming from, isn't it? So with these few words, a few references there, and Swastyastu. So Swastyastu, may well-being be yours. अभ्यासं करोतु and निश्चयेन स्वस्तिः भविष्यति. Namaste.